Welcome to your Daily 5 for Monday, November 25th, 2024. Over the weekend, I watched I guess it's considered a sequel to the original, one of the great melt garbage film classics, Street Trash, has had a sequel that was released, it was released this year, just made it to digital, called also Street Trash, which I don't really love, but that's put the title aside. But it is meant to be a sequel. Very lightly, there's not a lot of references to the first film, which makes sense since the first film doesn't really have much of a plot, to be honest. But it is meant to be a direct sequel to the first film, except that now it is set in Cape Town, South Africa. And this time there is much more of a narrative involved. It revolves around, as the first film did, a group of homeless people who realize that they are, in the first film, the Viper drink, I don't recall, and I've watched it a bunch of times, any type of actual reason why drinking Viper would make you melt, but it did affect the homeless predominantly in that film because they were generally stealing it or finding it, and it was considered cheap because it was bad liquor. And in this film, it is a far more intentional use of whatever the chemical agent is. It is deployed in multiple ways, through injection, through drinking the Viper liquor again, as well as being aerosolized. And it is being weaponized against the homeless by a tyrannical mayor who has promised his very rich and affluent constituents that he has figured out a solution to the homeless problem. Now, that narrative is not the most smoothly told in this film. It is there. It is the main plot of the movie, but it really, I feel, was somewhat in the background until the very, very end of the film. You kind of figure it out. This is not a particularly deep or complex film. And I think that's because the real focus of the movie, as it was in the first one, is on the effects of the people who are melting. And there are a lot of people who melt in this film. If you have missed this type of horror, and I don't even know that I could describe it as horror because it is so goofy most of the time that it's hard to take seriously. The first film was like that as well. I mean, when you see an individual who melts into a puddle of a face on a toilet, it is not easy to take that seriously, especially when all of the blood, if you want to call it that, whatever liquid was coming out of everybody, was basically Play-Doh colored. And that is the case in here as well. Bright, vibrant colors. You really barely ever see actual blood. What you're seeing is what looks like very, very bright paint that is exploding out of people. But the reason I would absolutely recommend people watch this is because there is so much practical effects work in it that we just don't see anymore. There is a bit of digital blood here and there for certain sequences, but a lot of this, and the director has said this was a point he wanted to stick to, a lot of it is practical effects, especially if you miss the old school kind of latex balloon effects where something would inflate under the skin and then explode. There is a ton of that in this movie, and that's what makes it worth seeing. So if you go in, and let's be honest, the first movie, if you saw it, didn't exactly have a very coherent story. It wasn't a well put together, thoughtful contemplation on the state of homeless in America. It was an excuse to make people melt and just show a lot of people looking about as dirty and miserable as possible. The new one pretty much tries to do the same thing, but also bolt on a story. I don't know how necessary the story really is when the effects are this wild, but I appreciate that it's there. But again, that's all secondary. What you're really watching this movie for is that if you enjoyed the first film for its melting effects, you're going to get way more of that in wild and different ways in this film. So I would say it's absolutely worth watching. Don't worry about the story. It doesn't really matter. There are some beats where they're trying to make something emotional out of it. I don't think in a movie like this that was ever going to work. I appreciate the effort. That's nice. But what really matters and what is absolutely successful are the special effects and the fact that so many of them are clearly practical and were done by people who wanted to show their love for doing practical gore effects. So yes, it is in that way, it feels every bit connected to the first film. And so I would say if you like the first film or melt films in general, you're going to have a good time with this. So again, title again is Street Trash, just it's 2024. If you want to see people exploding in bright and colorful ways, this is the movie for you. Later.